what is it about bones? We're not being difficult here. We see cases.
So the problem with the bones comes in is if they're actually physically able to swallow it. I always say stay away from any chops, lamb, bones, or anything like that, because the way they cut, they tend to be very, very sharp, and they can lodge very, very easily. One client that we were dealing with, they had given the scapula, so the shoulder blade of a lamb. So it's almost like a disc shape the way this was, and it got lodged just above the base of the heart. So that was a massive undertaking to try and get that little dog right.
Yeah, and that's thoracic surgery. That's major. So a very warm welcome, Dr. Nic Stirk. You are not a stranger to this podcast.
Yep. Thank you
Welcome
for having
back.
me back. Yeah, thank you.
We both love nutrition. We do a lot of discussion, even off air, about it.
Yeah.
So obviously we can refer listeners back if they haven't heard our discussions on nutrition. And one of our obviously top performing ones was us being locked in a car doing heat stroke.
Correct. We've had some pearlers of days in this last couple of weeks as well.
It's been crazy.
Terrible.
So some really valuable content, hopefully.
Yeah.
But today I've asked you to come back to discuss, rather than what you should be feeding your pets, what you really should not be feeding your pets. So it's as valuable as what you should, because the risks are really high. And so that's the topic of our conversation today. And I know that we can go on about this for ages and ages, and there's a lot to it. And maybe at some point, oh, sorry, I'm kicking the cat. Sorry, Zena. Maybe at some point we want to unpack some of these subjects a little bit further. But I thought just to give an oversight into some of the toxicities, some of the things that can cause major issues, and we'll break those down. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for having me.
in terms of where to start, there are obviously common things that, let's start with food items that we may have in our fridge so that it just keeps it, we try and keep categories together. There are certain things that owners may not be aware of. And I've noticed this in general conversation, particularly with a lot of people wanting to formulate home food or home cooked diets. So what are some of the things that you may find in your fridge, or certain items that you would advise owners are cautious about?
Not to use,
Yeah.
So from a dietary perspective, there are certain plants, fruits, and other items as well that should be used with caution, if at all. So the first couple of ones that come to mind, grapes, raisins, very common. We kind of get them all year round now anyway. So feeding anything that either has a raisin in it. So understandably, a raisin is almost like a dehydrated grape. Well, it's not almost, it is. So it's more concentrated in there. So raisins can potentially be more toxic than grapes themselves. So anything that contains grapes or raisins, sultanas, so Christmas cakes, as we've just gone through Christmas as well. Mince pies are a personal favorite of mine, but they will also contain either raisins or grapes or any vine fruits. So they can be particularly toxic in a varied amounts. Again, it's very difficult. It also goes according to the size of the pet as to how much they can ingest without showing any sort of adverse effects to it. But then again, how much is too much, how much is too little?
Just
so
better to avoid.
Exactly that. You don't want to take the chance.
And of course, we're approaching Easter, which is hot cross bun season.
Cross buns. Yeah, that's another thing, absolutely. And then we'll touch on chocolate with that now as well. Yeah, so if they do ingest a fair amount of grapes or raisins, it's usually the kidneys that get affected by something like that. So if it is caught early, if you've accidentally or purposefully fed your cat or your dog, cats probably won't eat it anyway, but some dogs will eat raisins and they'll eat grapes. It's better obviously not to, but there are things that we can do in order to reverse the negative effects, particularly on the kidneys as well. So we generally put them on fluid therapy. We would check the serum chemistry, so that's drawing blood and putting it through the machines to check ultimately what the kidney health is doing, if there has been any possible long-term damage. Usually it's quite acute, and if you manage to sort that situation out, then you don't get any sort of long-term effects from that. Understandably, again, the sooner you can intervene, the better. Chocolate now, let's touch on that.
Yes.
Because Easter, like you say, is just around the corner. So very, very basically, the darker the chocolate, the worse it is. So it does have to do with the cocoa that's in it. So if you're having your lunch 90% dark chocolate, that's way worse than a milk chocolate or a white chocolate. I don't even think white chocolate even has cocoa in it. So, but I still, because of the sugar content, the possibilities of artificial sweeteners, that's another thing that has to be considered. So, yeah, it can affect the heart, and it can be very, very detrimental, if not fatal, in large amounts. So, again, try not to get your dogs to eat that sort of thing. I know people love giving their pets treats. Pets love getting treats.
And they love chocolate. They seem to sniff it out.
Like most people, chocolate is a good one. So yeah, again, if you've witnessed it being ingested, then you need to seek veterinary attention immediately. There are ways that we can, unfortunately, shame for the poor animal, get them to vomit. So if it has happened very, very recently, half an hour to an hour at the longest, then usually inducing vomiting is enough to clear the stomach of the grapes, the raisins, the chocolate as well.
So let's talk about that, because I want to discuss so that we have sort of management thereof grouped together. So before we give away how we're going to manage the vomiting, because it's quite a subject to discuss what we use and how we use it and the time frame. A lot of people always forget about cocoa, and they think chocolate. Yes, I know, but I'm actually surprised that the number of people who think like muffins or chocolate cake, and then they don't associate that's the same. It's the theobromine, obviously, and that
100%.
And they do. I mean, they can get hold of these items quite easily.
They can be so crafty as well. You can put them onto the highest shelf, and if that little doggy wants to get hold of it, they will more than likely get hold of it.
Or scavenging in the bin. I often find a lot of our cases have been associated with them having access to the dustbin, and you throw that muffin away, and the dog's got hold of it. So it's quite scary. Yeah. So even by accident, so not intentional feeding.
Absolutely.
So one of the ones I wanted to ask you about, and I find, and I know we're gonna bring it up, but that is onions.
Yes.
Because I find a lot of owners, particularly when they want to feed scraps, no one really gives their dog onions. I mean, I don't personally like raw onions myself. I can't imagine feeding my dog it. But onions seem to be, and garlic and the onion family seem to be a good component of gravies. Often people just don't think it through. What is it about onions?
So also then just getting to why people would use onions. So yes, the human side of things, I mean, anyone smelling fried onions, as far as I'm concerned, you just know that something delicious is on its way potentially. So yes, in the gravies and the likes of that. But also those pet owners that are wanting to do home-cooked meals, for example. So because humans like the taste and potentially the smell of frying onions, they will then do the same for their pets. So too much onion can cause oxidative damage to the red blood cells. And that's obviously really not cool, not good.
No.
And the longer they're exposed to it, potentially the more damaging it's going to then get. So like a little once off or something like that is not disastrous. So it's not like a panic stations, but because if you are going to be including it into the dog or the cat's food, consistent exposure to it is not great, because then that oxidative damage accumulates. So it damages the red blood cells, which in effect will then destroy them. So will reduce the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood, and that will ultimately lead to the condition called anemia. So there's multiple causes of anemia. That's another whole podcast on itself anyway. But the damaging effects of onion. There seems to be some controversy at the moment with regards to garlic. I've only seen 2 articles, to be very honest, that have said garlic is fine and good for dogs. The rest of the multitude of other articles do claim that it is toxic, and it does have a similar effect to onions. So they are within the same plant family. But again, then, like, how much is too much? If you know that something is going to potentially be toxic, why are you going to fiddle around with it and see how far you can almost push the system?
And there's a lot of advice out there about sort of managing tick and flea using garlic. I would just err on the side of caution. I'm not really sure.
I don't know how I don't think there's been any major studies done on how effective it potentially is, but yes, that has been bantered around that garlic does have a positive effect against ticks and fleas, but I don't think that's necessarily the best route to go. Yeah.
Hey there, pet parents. It's Dr. Carra, the ultra pet vet here. Brachycephalic, meaning short-muzzled dogs, have uniquely shaped jaws that can make picking up and chewing normal kibble really difficult. That's why UltraPet has created a kibble specifically designed for easy pickup. It contains glucosamine, chondroitin, and green lip mussel extract to help support your dog's joints so that they stay mobile and active. The inclusion of beet pulp and prebiotics helps support a healthy gut by promoting the growth of beneficial bacteria in the digestive system. Omega-3 and 6 fatty acids promote a shiny coat and a healthy skin. UltraPet offers 100% money-back guarantee. Try UltraPet's premium recipe for short-muzzled dogs today. Okay, so from what you're saying, my understanding is that it can actually accumulate. The consequences can get worse and worse over a period of time. So it's not just a one hit. It's the fact that if you're doing that regularly.
It depends also on the dosage as well. So if there's a massive dose, but I don't think any dog in their right mind is going to go and eat an entire garlic bulb or anything else like that. So I think a huge ingestion of garlic or onion, yes, that can be detrimental. But if you're just adding a little bit of onion to the food, that will start to just accumulate over time. So
definitely,
I wouldn't say it's the best idea. Yeah.
So the other category that I wanted us to talk about are nuts, because I know some are fine. What is your advice in terms of the big no-nos, and just generally whether as a category you say just don't feed them?
Yeah, so macadamia nuts is probably on top of the list there. So not only, if you have the shelled ones, I don't know if you've ever had to try and crack a macadamia nut out of its shell. Those things are built to last. They are hardcore. And if that dog then swallows that can obviously result in a foreign body obstruction, which is also another topic, which we'll probably touch on a little bit later. But the nut itself has been shown to be toxic as well. So again, nut mixes, Christmas time, Easter time, there's probably also going to be lots of nuts around. It's better to rather just stay away from something like that as well.
Yeah. And you made mention of it before, but a lot of people like to treat, we've got beautiful Kongs and some of the things that we want to use when we're going out. Owners want to use peanut butter as maybe mix their pet food with peanut butter. It's quite a nice little tip. But some of the peanut butters contain xylitol. So what is it about xylitol that owners need to be cautious about? What does it do?
So it only seems to be dogs that are affected by this. It doesn't affect us humans negatively or cats that I haven't seen any reports about that. But ultimately, it has an insulin-like effect. So if they have it, it basically mimics insulin being released in the body, and it just boots the basal blood glucose out from underneath them. So they basically become hypoglycemic, which means that the normal physiological glucose, which is usually between sort of 4 and 8, just gets booted out from underneath them, and it drops down to 1, if not lower, and almost then, a diabetic coma. So that is something that needs to be addressed very, very quickly. And if you catch it quickly, you can reverse it. You put them onto IV fluids, and you put them onto a glucose infusion as well. So it just picks that glucose up and then you continuously monitor what the glucose is doing. And as soon as it's basically stabilized, then you pretty much then out the woods as well. But if it's not attended to, that can be very, very detrimental. And it's not only peanut butter. So peanut butter is a really, really nice thing, like you say, to put into the Kongs and stuff. But don't go for the sugar-free, artificially sweetened, all of that sort of stuff. It's fine for humans, but not for dogs.
And
also, so nuts can also be very, very fatty. So if you have a particular breed that is predisposed to pancreatitis, for example, ingestion of a large amount of fat can certainly trigger a pancreatic episode. Little Schnauzers are unfortunately one of the top breeds that do get affected by that condition. And it varies in severity ultimately. And you've really done a podcast on pancreatitis as well. So keep away from fatty foods if you know that your dog potentially might be prone to a pancreatic flare-up or the likes.
So this is a great thing that could lead us into. So those kind of things could be sort of fatty meat or, sort of any major dietary change like that contains high fats. But this leads us into potential discussion on avos.
Yes.
So the avos are one of those, when I mention avocados being something that we do not advise our dogs eating, I feel like a bit of a hypocrite because my dogs eat avos. Not by choice. I do not feed them avos. But they help themselves.
Yes.
And they're so conditioned that they will hear an avo drop in the garden and they run and compete to get there first.
Absolutely.
And they are fine.
Yes.
They are fine. But there are some dogs that are very, very sensitive to it. So talk about like why from a pancreatitis and from a...
So yeah, even though avos are considered to be a good fat, too much fat is not a good thing.
Yeah.
So yes, again, if you have a particularly susceptible breed or dog, that can certainly trigger pancreatitis. I always try and make light of the situation. I just say that the pancreas is the most cantankerous, obnoxious organ, and it really does not take much to get it angry. And you don't want it angry because it's a horrible, horrible condition, which is potentially even life-threatening as well. So as you mentioned, most dogs will potentially be absolutely fine. Some might get a little bit of a runny tummy. Most of them won't eat the pip. Thankfully, they're quite clever with regards to that. But that, again, is another foreign body obstruction just waiting to potentially happen. And also weight gain. So you always
they're
know
glossy.
They've
got a lovely
the coats look beautiful. But you always know
so
when it's avo
overweight.
season in our area, because I think every second or third property has got an avo tree, if not multiple.
Yeah.
And like you say, they hear them drop, they will sit underneath the tree. So us as humans, we don't really ever get to see them unless you're quick, because the dogs or the monkeys will get hold of them.
Yeah.
But avos for cage birds is an absolute no-no. If they do eat it, it will be fatal.
Yeah.
And unfortunately with birds can be particularly finicky. They'll be sitting on their perch, and then from one blink to the next, they'll be on the bottom of the cage dead, and you won't even know that there was really anything wrong.
Absolutely.
So birds are particularly, actually very sensitive. So cage birds, yes, you might even see some of the wild birds. I've seen some of our delightful hardy daws tucking into an avo in the garden, and there don't seem to be any ill effects with that. But certainly, cage birds it's an absolute no-no. Yeah.
Let's talk about milk. Tell us why we do not advise generally our pets to be given milk, because it seems certainly cats like it. Cream, milk. It's hard to.
Yeah, again, it's got to do with the fat content as well, and with it being a dairy product. So, us humans are the only mammalian species that continue to consume dairy products post-weaning. So if we weren't around, dogs, cats, any other mammals, once they finished weaning, they go into solid food, and the body actually stops producing the enzymes in order to deal with that. So I know it's a bit of a catch-22, and there's probably a bit of a controversy about it as well, but I think if your pet almost gets small amounts frequently, and as long as their body is still being stimulated to digest it, it shouldn't be that much of a problem. However, if you then give a dog or a cat a dairy product, be it yogurt, cheese, because cheese is a favorite dosing, I'm going to just pop it in a little block of cheese and get the tablet down. If they're not used to that, it'll either result in horrible, horrible diarrhea, and then also with it being, depending on the fat content, so like cream, full cream milk, for example, again, that pancreas is probably just waiting to be objectionable. So I think, yes, little bit, like a few little laps of a little bit of milk in the saucer.
Diluted with a bit of water.
I don't think it's going to be that detrimental. Again, provided they keep on with it so that the enzymes are still there to deal with it. But certainly if your dog is not used to dairy products, if your cat is not used to dairy products from the fat and then from the dairy point of view, rather just stay away from that as well.
They are considered lactose intolerant.
Oh, that's exactly it. Yeah. So the diarrhea can be
Terrible.
far from delightful. Yeah.
So before we go on to foreign bodies, one of our favorite topics of conversation and discussion is risk of raw foods. And I know that we've done a podcast on it. In fact, it's a very controversial subject at the moment, and we're very happy to discuss it. I mean, there's no shying away from it. But just to touch on it, because I know that we've probably hammered out the subject. Why is it, for those who haven't listened to that podcast, Why is it that we recommend that food coming from the fridge, and I'm thinking of all the products we keep in our fridge, why is it that we're not recommending raw food?
Oh, yeah. I think in the blurb of this podcast, you can just put a link to, because we really went in depth with with the podcast on then the raw food diets and the likes of that. So obviously we don't advocate for it, but if you are wanting to do the fresh food or raw food diet, we always just cook it, because there's the pathogens that are involved, there's the bacteria that are involved, there's the parasites that can be involved as well. And very, very recently, and I'm talking within the last 2 weeks, there have been multiple reports from the United States of cats being infected with avian influenza from raw food and unpasteurized milk. So it's not us making this nonsense up. It is a real concern. So understandably, if a cat can get the H1N1 avian influenza, it's only a matter of time before we will be infected by it as well.
Yeah.
And it is a worry. So thankfully, it seems to be contained within the US, but there have been other reports from the UK with other medical conditions coming through with pets that have eaten a raw food diet. And I don't think the control here in South Africa is particularly good or followed up on with regards to criteria and quality control, unlike the commercially produced diets, which again we've also then covered in another podcast as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, why take the risk if you are wanting to do that? I mean, all the evidence is basically there to say, bare minimum, if you're wanting to do that, just cook it.
Yeah.
Because it eliminates all the pretty much all of the pathogens, be they bacterial, viral, or parasitic. And yeah,
that's why we cook our food.
Precisely that. And it does aid in digestibility as well. Otherwise, we would all be eating raw food as well. So in that respect, just if you want to, go for it, but rather just cook it.
So even though we're going to discuss cooked food and bones and brine meat and whatnot, I do want to take the opportunity to reiterate, yes, we're saying if you want to home formulate your foods, fine, make sure they're cooked, but make sure that they're balanced and complete. We don't have our pets living for 100 years. Everything is condensed within a very short period of time, and the impact on nutrition is like far greater than us getting it wrong for a short period of time. You will not necessarily see the impact in a week or 2 weeks, but later on, if they get a disease process, it might be a contributing factor in terms of their nutritional imbalances. So to take note of the fact that it's not necessarily like getting E. coli or salmonella, those nutritional imbalances can be seen later on.
Yeah. So I mean, a dog that eating exclusively chicken, yes, it's a protein source. It's not balanced necessarily. So a little Yorkie that's only eating chicken, a little cat that's only eating tuna, it's not a fully balanced thing. And I think you and I have been in the profession long enough to have witnessed and seen firsthand what nutrition, the benefits of good nutrition versus malnutrition can be. I mean, some of those, the defects and everything else can be permanent, that you can't get rid of that. You can't reverse anything. So right from when they are on solid foods, they need to be on excellent nutrition, especially during that developmental stage.
Then and later on particularly, but I mean
So that's why, for example, the commercial brands have then done life stages. So there will be a specific puppy or kitten food, then you get your adult, and then you get your senior, because everybody has got, or every life stage has got different nutritional needs. Small breed, medium breed, large breed. So cats are generally fine because they tend to be more or less the same. But I think it's important to do that that research and that insight into the commercial foods, because again, we've been in this profession long enough to have seen the benefits of the premium diets, and then good nutrition in general.
And they go through feeding trials, they go through digestibility trials, they're regularly testing the food. And if you want to home formulate your pet's food, firstly, I would urge you to approach a veterinary nutritionist.
Absolutely.
But understand that your pet is the test subject.
Yeah.
So the only way of you knowing whether things are going to go well longer term is through success or failure.
Yeah.
And if that's the route you want to take respectfully, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But cooking food and making sure that it's balanced and that you're not obviously adding any of these things that we were talking about earlier, which is important to have that guidance.
And then also just briefly touching on that, so there will be certain nutritional lifestyles that humans will have. So either, I will say normal, but then you get the vegetarians and then you get vegans. Cats are not small dogs. Dogs are not small horses, for example, either. So cats being obligate carnivores, they cannot survive on a vegan diet unless there's a major, formulation that they can potentially use a plant protein or something like that. And I've known when I was working in the UK, briefly, there was actually a case that we were having to deal with, and it went to the RSPCA for animal cruelty because this particular family was vegan. And there's nothing wrong with being vegan. If you want to be vegan, that's great. But you can't extrapolate that lifestyle across, particularly to a cat,
and impose
because
it on them.
they are obligate carnivores, which means that they have to have animal protein. So this cat was skin and bone. It never developed properly. It looked on an x-ray, it was virtually translucent because there was just no calcification or mineralization of the bone. So this poor little thing was going through absolute hell. And so once the RSPCA took over, we unfortunately didn't, I wasn't the attending vet on that particular case, but they had to go and testify and everything else. I mean, it's a real thing. And it was never meant to be intentionally harmful to the pet because they didn't know. So now they do, unfortunately. And I think that case kind of just blew that aspect of nutrition from a veterinary point of view out of the water, and it educated a heck of a lot of people with regards to what you should and shouldn't feed your pets.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk scraps. I mean, obviously we've just expressed our concern about balanced nutrition. And there are a lot of people who supplement their pet's diet with scraps. What percentage of the diet would you say is reasonable to use as treats or scraps, assuming that it's not risky food or toxic food?
I think, that can be quite a difficult thing to address with the client as well, because as I mentioned just now, dogs and cats enjoy getting the treats. The owners enjoy giving the treats. But I think it's the volume and the frequency at which they are getting done. Their metabolisms are obviously incredibly different to ours. So we can deal with a hamburger, no problem. A hamburger size treat to them is way too much. And there are little tricks and little mind games that you can play with your pets to decrease the amount of treats that you are giving, particularly if it is table scraps and the likes of that. Because then again, if you're one of these people that likes really salty food, you've added all the salt to your food, which is not great for them either, if it's going to be in the gravy with the onions, all the rest of that. A nice pork roast with the crackling, and if there's a little bit of crackling left over, nice and fatty, it's delicious, but can have the repercussions later on then as well. So I think if your dog is a little barrel, that they are round instead of shapely, then it's probably, and it's amazing how even just modifying what treats you do give the pets before they even go on to like a restricted calorie diet, for example, even just monitoring and manipulating the little system to decrease the amount of treats that you are giving those dogs, you will be amazed at how that itself can even get them to start slimming down. So I do think table scraps, you have to be a little bit careful. My dad is one of them. As soon as my dad picks up the dinner plates, the dogs are through in the kitchen. Anybody else can pick up the plates and the dogs won't bother. But as soon as my dad goes through, because they know when dad goes through, if there's any little scraps on the table, on the plates, the dogs are going to get them. And it's usually, in my experience, and then from what the wives say, it's usually the men that are the problem.
So I know that I talk a lot about this on my social media account, but I want to take the opportunity, because you don't mind, like when we talk about nutrition, a lot of people feel that processed foods, being kibble diets, are the same as processed foods that are getting a really bad rap, and people are trying to stay away from processed foods because generally for us, processed foods means high in fats and sugars and salt. Processed foods for pets is not the same. And I think it's difficult because it's like saying, I don't know, something's dangerous for people and it's going to have the same implications for our pets. And it's processed food is not high for pets. Commercial processed food is balanced nutrition. There are no fillers. There is no roadkill. It doesn't contain urine or feces.
It's not getting swept off the floor.
Exactly. It's not waste. It is correctly formulated and under really strict legislation and regulation.
And that's the thing. So Dallard, which falls under the Department of Agriculture, they are incredibly strict about ingredients, and I think more so importantly, definitions of ingredients. So if something does not fit a definition of an ingredient, it can't be used, or it can't be under that definition's or that ingredient's name. So I actually walked through the shops the other day because I'd been talking to a friend of mine who she's in the dairy industry. And you will have noticed now that, for example, yogurt, if it fits the definition of what a yogurt should be with regards to full cream, low fat, no fat, whatever, you will have noticed now that some of them are actually being called a dairy snack because they do not fit the definition or the ingredients of what yogurt is. Feta cheese is another one. If it is legit feta, it will say feta cheese. Otherwise, it'll say
modified
cheese or something like that. So I think they're actually becoming stricter with regards to definitions and the likes of that. So when it comes to particularly even animal feeds and then the pet food industry, they are incredibly strict. And like I say, if something does not fit a particular definition of an ingredient, it cannot be included. And every batch is tested. And if you get found out that you are doing something incorrectly, they will come and they will recall the product off the shelves until it gets rectified. So certainly in South Africa, and again, we've chatted about the V number on the back of the packages of South African produced dog foods and cat foods. If they have got that stamp of approval, you know that the ingredients in that food are not going to be detrimental to your cat or your dog. And it is, like you've said, it is a fully balanced diet. It has to meet a particular criteria, and it's not one that a certain company has come up with. It's all studies that have been done either through a university, pet nutrition in general. So it's not a company's formula.
No.
Yes, they might tweak it a little bit for particular reasons.
Yeah, palatability and marketing terms.
But they have to stay within the basics. So if it is a basic, if it's got that V number on, and again, imported foods as well, they will also have their quality controls. And those quality controls will have to be in line with our quality controls. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to sell it in this country.
Yeah.
So to put that, it almost like just to put it to rest, because there's always so much controversy about all the rubbish that goes into the foods and stuff like that. Any commercial dog or cat food that has got the V number, has got that stamp of approval, you know that your animal is not going to be nutrient deficient. And that's the bottom line. So you do get,
And we are seeing our pets live longer as a result of better nutrition.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about it. Good preventative healthcare and the nutrition being.
Yeah. And not everyone can afford a premium diet. And there's no getting away from that.
Yeah.
But if they have to then get a pet food from, say, a vet shop, for example, or an online store, or even a supermarket, if it has got that V number, you're not causing any harm to your pet. Absolutely. So if that's what you can afford, so be it. You're not doing any harm. And I don't think people or clients or pet owners should be made to feel bad by certain other people in our profession that will badmouth certain diets and brands and the likes of that because they don't fit sort of like their idea of what food should be.
Yeah.
Yes,
or an ingredient list.
If everybody was to be fed, or all the cats and dogs were to be fed premium diets, that would be absolutely fantastic. not everyone can afford it. And I don't think your pet owner should not feel bad for not being able to afford a premium diet.
It's still better than trying their best to formulate home diets
Or table scraps and a
and
little
using
bit of
table
rice
scraps,
and bread
which are not
or
balanced.
whatever. No.
Yeah.
So if you're getting a commercial brand from a supermarket, a vet shop, or your vet, you're not doing your pets any injustice. Yeah.
So let's talk about bones. You knew it was coming. Because obviously they're not toxic. And this is where my analogy of, so I've been feeding my dog bones and I've always fed my bones and I've never had an issue. It's like me saying, I've driven without my seatbelt for the last 10 years and I've been fine.
And I've never had an accident, until it happens.
When it happens, it's a disaster. So please explain to our listeners, what is it about bones? We're not being difficult here. We see cases.
Yeah, I think it's also got to do with the type of bone. And I'm probably going to get raked over the coals for this, but at least the marrow bones for a small dog, for example, they can't break it and they can't swallow it. So the problem with the bones comes in is if they're actually physically able to swallow it. And depending on the size, it's not going to digest completely. It goes out of the stomach and into the intestines, and that's where it can potentially cause problems.
A lot of narrowing.
Yeah. So really, really sharp bones. So I always say stay away from any chops, lamb bones or anything like that, because the way they cut, they tend to be very, very sharp and they can lodge very, very easily. Quite a common place is actually in the chest, just before the esophagus goes over the base of the heart, because there is a slight little narrowing there, and that is a prime place that's the first place that things are going to get lodged if they are potentially, and that's specialist surgery, because that's, again, depending on how lodged it is. With the advances of equipment and technology and the likes of that, depending on what it is, you can sometimes actually anesthetize the patient, and you get then the endoscopes that have got the little clamps on them, and if you're lucky, you can actually then pull it out if you're not going to be causing any trauma. When we were in university, we got taught if it was big enough, or you actually push it through into the stomach, because that's a lot easier to access from a surgical point of view if you're needing to. But some of those bones can be, if they're thin. One client that we were dealing with, they had given the scapula, so the shoulder blade of a lamb, and a portion of that. So it's a very, very thin bone, but it's got a very, very big, so it's almost like a disc shape the way this was, and it got lodged in the just above the base of the heart. So that was a massive undertaking to try and get that little dog right, and they did. We had to refer it to one of the specialist referral centers, but they managed to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, that's thoracic surgery.
Yeah, that's big. So if it does manage to pass through, doesn't digest in the stomach, understandably there's quite a bit of leeway with regards to how the small intestines works, and the articles that I've read of what has actually managed to pass through has been phenomenal.
And a lot of people may be really lucky.
Yes,
that's great.
Gosh, having bull terriers, I know all about foreign bodies and what gets eaten, etc., etc. Yeah. I think there hasn't been one. I think probably 3 of the 4 bull terriers that we've had have it some way or form. We've either had to make them vomit or surgically remove, or just really wait for it to pass out. Yeah. So if it does get lodged, that is a problem. So you'll often find that your dog might be a little bit uncomfortable, or cat, because even though cats are considered to them a little bit more intelligent than dogs, they too can, if they're just licking something, because their tongues are so rough, they can inadvertently get it down the hatch. And then, yes, it can also form an obstruction. So you'll often find your belly tenderness, they'll be vomiting because whatever's going in has got nowhere to go, so it's going to come straight back out again. There might initially be a bit of a diarrhea because the intestine is now trying to relax and get stuff moving through, and eventually there's not going to be anything coming out because there's no gut content left to come through. And that's when owners will then generally bring them to us. If it's big enough, you'll be able to feel it with abdominal palpation. So we palpate the abdomen from side to side. If it's big enough, you should be able to feel it. And then that will give you some sort of idea of what's potentially going on. X-rays is a very, very good way of diagnosing that as well. Again, depending on what the foreign body is comprised of. So bone we classify as being a mineral opacity, so that'll come out generally white. very easy to see. Stones fall into that category as well. A very common thing generally of puppies, but you will get the older dog that will also eat stones every now and again as well. So those you can easily pick up on an x-ray. If it's something a little bit more subtle, like a mealycob or something like that.
I was going to mention the mealycob.
I think with our x-ray processes now, you can actually see the detail of the mealycob in the gut, whereas before you just sort of like saw this grey haze. So I think from a resolution point of view, we are leaps and bounds ahead of what we used to be able to diagnose. Otherwise, if it's like a plastic or a fabric or something like that, we then look for telltale signs of potentially then what the foreign body, if there is a foreign body there, gas accumulation. There's certain patterns that the gut will then make that will give you an inclination of that. Ultrasound as well can also be helpful in diagnosing that. But if there is an obstruction, you don't have very long to faff around. You need to get in there surgically and remove it. And it's very rare, funny enough, I haven't had to do many resections of the gut, because if it's that bad, it can cause a section of the gut to actually die off, or the blood supply to be compromised, and you actually then have to remove that portion and then put those two ends, you suture them back together again. So the smaller the incision that you can do into an intestine or the stomach, the better, because there are unfortunately the potential side effects or complications of the surgeries. If there's a bit of a leak, if that the anastomosis breaks down, for example, then you're going to get gut content leaking into the abdomen. Then you get a raging peritonitis, which is a whole other kettle of fish, and that can also be potentially life-threatening as well. So the sooner the better.
Scary stuff. So I promised that we would talk about what to do in the event that your animal ingests something. Obviously, you've spoken through the foreign body, but let's talk about, let's do a case example. Let's do chocolate, because it's so common. We see that one very commonly. You've just seen it happen. Owner phone says, oh no, the dog. We obviously have calculators to assess what is a critical amount relative to the pet's body weight.
Correct.
And, we can work out whether this is how urgent it is. But because nobody wants vomiting or diarrhea, which is a consequence, it's irrelevant of how much they've taken in. What is the process and how do we manage it? Can it be managed at home? Do we advise they come in, and what do we do?
So understandably, there is the time frame. So if you've come home after being at work and there's a whole pile of Ferrero Rocher wrappers on the floor, and you don't know potentially when, I would still get the dog or potentially the cat seen to. If you have witnessed it, then get through to the vet as soon as possible, because there are medications that we can actually use to physically make them vomit. So shame, it's not a nice experience for them. They don't know what's really happening, bless them. So it's a product called apomorphine that you just mix with, I mix it with a little bit of water. They used to say go into the eye, because then it gets absorbed by the conjunctiva of the eye. But we've actually found that going into the nose works quicker, and then they don't have that grittiness when they're blinking and the likes of that. So you'll see them, we'll take them outside. They'll potter around in the grass. I think this is a nice little outing, and then they start slowing down, and then the drooling starts, and then it actually induces them to then vomit. And again, depending, so chocolate is a when I say benign, it's not like it's a caustic or irritant. So there are certain things as well that we wouldn't induce vomiting, because if it is something that's potentially caustic, so either very acidic or very alkaline, we don't want it to really gone down and cause damage. We don't want it to come back up and cause damage. So then it's usually a case of, funny enough, milk as a neutralizing agent, or if you have if you know what it is, like if it's an acidic agent, then you want to then use an alkalining agent to try and then neutralize that pH so that it doesn't do any more damage. And then we then give them anti-nausea after that, so that they don't have the continued effects of
and support them. IV fluids,
100%,
blood test to monitor.
Well, again, depending on how. So, if you've come home and you find the whole box of Ferrero Rocher on the floor with all the wrappers, and you don't know, then we would generally then admit them, give them fluid therapy, and like you say, just do a basic blood panel, just check what the liver and the kidneys are up to, the electrolytes potentially as well,
blood glucose, especially if we're talking
xylitol and the likes of that. So the sooner the better. If you are in the middle of nowhere and it's going to be like a 4-hour trip to get to the local vet. It does make me cringe a little bit, but there aren't many washing powders available yet really anymore. It tends to now be the little pods or the liquids.
Washing powder.
But there is, if you can get hold of washing powder, you need to then mix it up with a little bit of water to make it almost like a firm. It must not be runny. So you always like make it into like a
paste,
a ball, and then you can try and get it down the back of the dog's throat. It is incredibly irritant, which is what then makes them vomit. But you also there's a very, very high probability that you could then get aspiration pneumonia. So there's nothing worse than it going into the right place to make them vomit, because that's gross. You do not want a detergent, and you do not want washing powder in the dog's lungs or the cat's. I've never done it on a cat. I have heard of it being done on dogs.
In an emergency
situation. It is much better, because obviously the medication that we use goes up the nose. It gets absorbed in that area there. It's not going to have any chance of getting anywhere near the lungs. So yeah, emergency only. Otherwise, get them into the vet so that we can then sort that out for you.
And even worth then phoning your emergency vet.
Absolutely.
Or, just getting hold of a emergency vet just to get it under their advice, because then you may be doing it for like a tiny little bit of chocolate and it wasn't necessary. So you've got to weigh up risk-benefit ratio before you...
And that's the thing. There are 24-hour facilities that there will be somebody available for you to chat to during office hours. Then obviously your own vet will be able to help you with something like that. And I think that is an important thing. If it is one little raisin in a Great Dane, that's really not going to... You don't have to panic about something like that. We don't have to induce vomiting. But certainly you don't post on a Facebook community forum like, what do you think? We are a phone call away. Just pick up the phone. You can WhatsApp if it's not that much of an emergency, or just phone. That's what we're here for, is to give you that information. We are here to help, because you're going to get all sorts of weird and wonderful things that are potentially going to be more detrimental to your pet if you try them. So that's why I say, the washing powder is an absolute... It's almost like it's an absolute last resort if you can't get anywhere near a facility to help you. So, just give us a call. Definitely. We know what to do. So,
Great advice. And I know that we, at some point, hopefully will deal with other toxicities, the other kind of poisonings and rat poison and whatnot. But obviously...
She just made me remember now. So, lilies.
Yes.
So, either in the garden... in the pots, because they're all sold in the shops, or then freshly cut lilies. If any plant can be described as a lily, you need to be careful of it. So cats, like I say, are more intelligent. They generally don't go and start eating plants, particularly within the house. But any part of the lily plant is toxic. So the flowers, the pollen, the stems, the leaves, even the water that they are contained in, even the bulb if they're in a plant, if they're in a pot. So that is something very, very important to be aware of. So yes, also your cat might not eat it or ingest the petals or the leaves or the stems or the water. All of us know what that pollen is like, and it sticks. And they, being such fastidious groomers, if it goes onto their whiskers, if it comes on, they will groom it off and then ingest it as well. So that's something... She just made me think of it now.
Household-wise.
So as beautiful as flowers are, the lily family particularly are something to watch out for.
So, I mean, if you get some lilies and you have cats, one of the things I do is I take the pollen off, I snip those things so that at least there's not the contact and I put them high. Cats generally don't
that's a nice
them.
little tip, particularly the pollen, because I think with the cats it's going to be more of the problem is them grooming the pollen off them. But also that pollen, if it gets onto a tablecloth or something like that, it stains. That's a nasty pollen, that one.
Thank you for all your great advice.
Sure. It's been a nice little broad topic today.
Nice for us to tackle some of the don't eats rather than the do's. But there's a whole host of things I know that we will tackle. Like I said, some of the other toxicities, what happens if your dog's intentionally poisoned. Hopefully we'll get the opportunity to discuss that in a future podcast.
But then also when under the comment section on all of the platforms that Pause and Effect is on, ask questions and we will be able to get back to you about if you have any concerns as well. I mean, ultimately, again, it's another avenue you ask the professionals, you don't necessarily need to ask the community. So ask the people who will be ultimately helping the pets at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
And we're
that's
very
what we're
happy
here
to
for.
assist. Yeah.
That's what we are for.
Really grateful. Thank you. Thank you very much
Welcome.
for all your
Thanks again
time
for
and
having
explaining
me.
things so
Yeah.
nicely. I know you're very passionate about education, and
Yeah.
it comes across in our discussions. So
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you.
Cool.
Thanks.
Dr. Nic Stirk.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode on the Pause and Effect podcast. If you found the discussion helpful, please like, share, and follow our podcasts. Don't forget to leave us a comment or review. We love hearing from our listeners. Remember, you can listen to us on your preferred podcast platform. Welcome back to Just for Pets. You're with Dr. Carra.
Hello, Doctor. It's Chanel the Persian. And, I can't seem to stop retching to get this hairball up.
Are you on a special diet?
Excuse me?
Hairball control food will really help, and maybe some Laxapet. And lucky for you, Just for Pets have a big range.
Well, how early can I get some?
Order today, and we'll deliver pronto.
Wow, I feel better already.
Justforpets.co.za. Vet approved, pet adored. Get it all to your door.